Hello and welcome to Sacred Spaces. On tonight's episode, we're at the Beaurepaire Centre at the Melbourne University, and I'm joined by Dr. Christine Phillips and Professor Hannah Louie.
Yep.
Christine, tell me a bit about the Beaurepaire Centre.
So this is a great example of a modernist public building. It's a swimming pool and a gymnasium, and it opened up in 1957 and was designed by Eggleston MacDonald Seacombe.
Okay.
Really great Melbourne practice.
Yeah. And Hannah, what attracts you to this building?
Well, I guess I've been interested in swimming pools for a long time.
Yeah.
But also, I guess this is just a great example of a 1950s building where architects work with artists, and yet it's a sort of quite a technical building as well.
Yeah,
so it's a really interesting building.
That sounds fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, let's go in and have a look.
Okay, sure.
Let's go. So, here we are at the pool.
Yes, it's a very fine space, this beautiful pool pavilion, and it's particularly great for its technical innovation, its structure and its swimming pool design.
Okay. Now, Christine, I understand you actually did a PhD
on public swimming pools, and Hannah was my supervisor.
I was.
Wonderful.
Yes.
So tell me about that collaboration. I mean, how did that go?
Well, I knew Hannah and I actually first met at a conference throughout, and we discussed both our love of swimming pool architecture, particularly public and community pools, and what an asset they can be for communities, and the cultural and rich social histories that get attached to swimming pools.
Yeah. But Christine did something quite different with her PhD, because it wasn't just history. She actually got into the pool and tried to record and understand how it feels to be in water.
So you actually swam in the pool as part of your PhD?
I think it's a pretty special kind of architecture, the swimming pool one, and I think I really wanted to focus on the experience of the person actually going inside the swimming pool and swimming, and what it feels like to actually experience that kind of architecture. So yes, that was my focus.
So it's what you might call like an immersive experience.
An immersive sensorial experience, yes.
Absolutely.
And what conclusions did you draw from that experience?
Well, my thesis was focusing on swimming pools sited next to natural bodies of water, so I was really looking at that relationship between an artificial body of water, which is a swimming pool, next to a river or a lake or an ocean, and those beautiful tensions that you get between the architecture and nature.
Because I mean, so in that ways, this place is actually quite unique in many ways.
You know, it's a fairly early example of what we take for granted now with sort of covered indoor swimming pools that have all the facilities, but it was really up to date, and they, before they built this pool, they'd been on a big sort of trip looking at pools in the latest around the world. So in the 50s, just before the Olympics, this was
This was innovative.
Fantastic.
Well, I think we'll do. Maybe we'll explore some more of those aspects of the pool later.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. So, Christine, tell me about the technical innovations of the pool.
Well, one of the most notable features, Glenford, is its steel portal frame structure. And it was quite common during this period to celebrate structure, show it off so everyone could see it. So when you're doing laps from one end to the other, you can lie back, do your backstroke, and you can actually see how the building was put together, and the beautiful timber cladding in between the structure. Another unusual feature of the pool is that it's got the deep end in the centre of the pool.
Oh, that's unusual.
So the idea with that was to allow lots of teaching to happen on either end. So that was another sort of functional component of the swimming pool.
And also the walls themselves were quite significant.
Yes, so you get the two long walls on either side, fully glazed, so you get beautiful views on the northern and southern aspects, and the heavy masonry walls on either end. And as you can see, you get beautiful sort of views out to the landscape through those tall, narrow glazed windows.
Wonderful. Hannah,
Yeah.
tell me about Frank Beaurepaire.
Yeah, well, he was a really famous Olympic swimmer in the early decades of the 20th century. He'd been a Lord Mayor of Melbourne as well,
right.
and was a benefactor. Had a lot of wealth through industry, and a benefactor for Melbourne University to develop the pool. And I think his idea was, as was a lot of people at the time in developing university campuses, that life on campus is more than just study.
Yes.
It's about developing the mind and the body. And so sports facilities, and then you get buildings like Wilson Hall was rebuilt at the same sort of time for the sort of civic and ceremonial life of the campus.
And I think that maybe goes to explain why Melbourne has so many great civic buildings. There's a real pride there, isn't there?
I think so. And there'd been a lot of civic building at the end of the 19th century, but then in the 1950s you get a real explosion again of things like the Maya Music Bowl and all these buildings, but really interesting architecture for civic things.
Yeah, and like I say, we talked about the modernist approach as well. So at that time there were a number of really interesting architectural firms. Tell me about those.
Yeah, well, certainly like Eggleston, McDonald and Seacombe for this building, they did develop early buildings at Monash University. They had other architects like Robin Boyd, Roy Grounds. And Robin Boyd was an important critic at the time as well, and a promoter of modernism. So he championed things like this building and the Olympic buildings as well. It's been very modern and innovative.
And apparently the architects went around the whole world looking at different buildings. So they really
absolutely. And
researched.
There was and certainly the 50s and 60s worldwide there was a lot of interest in daring structures and sort of solving the problem of how do you span a swimming pool in different kinds of innovative ways.
Thank you. So Christine, where are we now? Explain our location.
So this is the northern facade of the building, which is quite different from the southern side, and it's beautifully sited in the recreational and sports precinct of the university, which gives it great outlooks and views from the gym and the swimming pool.
And Hannah, you were saying that there were three distinct bays?
So it was always designed, I mean, like any modernist building, to show its function. And so it's very much, you have the first bay, it's about the gym, and then you have this one, which was originally a trophy room area, it was the other way around, I can't remember, and then the pool.
Right.
And so, and then the structure sort of reinforces that through the design.
And could you explain the term modernist? Because most viewers won't actually understand what that term means.
Well, it's kind of a tricky word in some ways because it means different things. But essentially, it's a style of architecture that comes out of Europe from the sort of 1910s onwards, and it sort of rejects everything that went before it that was historical. It's new. It's about function. And it's a completely different shift in architecture.
Right. Okay. All right. And in Melbourne, did Melbourne embrace that modernist approach in the 50s?
It certainly did. It really started to emerge in Melbourne in the 1930s.
Oh, okay.
But this is a post-World War example, so there was a bit of a sort of delayed time, and then in the 1950s we saw a sort of resurgence of it come back in these great public civic buildings.
And could you maybe give me some examples of other buildings that have that modernist trend off the top of your head?
I think what's really interesting about this one is the expression of the structure. So as you can see, all the structure you see on the outside of the building. And it was a really great engineer that worked on this one that also worked on buildings that everyone would know, like the Sydney Maya Music Bowl.
I've been there a few times.
And also the Melbourne Olympic Swimming Pool. So they were really very much about expressing the function, but also expressing and celebrating the structure. So it was all about celebrating technology, and there were all sorts of things happening with structural innovations that were expressed through the buildings.
Great. Okay, thank you. So Christine, tell me about this beautiful mural behind us.
It is beautiful,
It is,
isn't it,
yes,
Glenford?
yeah,
It's designed by an artist called Leonard French. And I think many of the listeners would have been to the National Gallery Victoria and experienced that beautiful coloured stained glass ceiling, which was also designed by Leonard French. So he was quite a well-known artist during this period.
And I think there's a significance that the art and architecture came together on this project quite beautifully.
That's correct. So during this period, architects were quite interested in engaging with artists, including them in the design process. And it's not just the mural, it's also the mosaic tiles on the outside of the building.
Yeah, and there was also, Len French designed a mosaic sort of desk counter, but unfortunately that got lost somewhere along
How
the
do you mean
line.
it got lost?
Well, we don't know. When I went into the archives, I saw an old photograph of it, but it got lost, unfortunately.
Yeah. So, but there's a lovely symmetry, though, isn't there, between art and architecture, not just back in the 50s.
Yeah. Well, I think there was a strong conversation. From looking through journals like Arts and Architecture and things at the time, it wasn't always a happy conversation, but I think particularly modern architects who were designing quite sort of stripped back, bare kind of buildings to give them some sense of ceremony or personal expression, they called on artists. So it really works well here, where it brings the colour and movement and some,
And another thing I'm interested in is there's a whole connection between swimming and the sea in Australia. Tell me a bit about that, because you've done that quite a bit, haven't you? Both of you.
Yeah, both of us. Yeah, I was involved with the Australian Biennale team that took the pool, the Australian idea of the pool to Venice, very successfully. And with that idea in mind, I suppose that swimming, whether it's at the beach or whether it's in a pool, has been particular to Australia, I think, as being, it's almost like another kind of public place for us. And that's
part of our ethos, I think. And I think, it's obviously due to our beautiful climate, so we love to get outside, and we have a very strong swimming culture in Australia, but it's also a community space as well. So that's one thing Hannah and I are both interested in, that community side of swimming. Hot day, you take the family to the local pool, you've got your ice cream melting down, children running around, but it's just a really lovely characteristic of Australian culture.
And tell me a bit about Lovell Chen, because they were responsible for the restoration of this mural. So
so they worked on, I guess as with any kind of historic building, there's research is done, and then they worked on the sort of conservation of the fabric of the building, of the materials, because you can imagine with swimming pools, they don't, they weather pretty badly. There's chemicals and water, and so it's a tricky kind of conservation job. And usually they get knocked down, and new ones get built. So why this is so nice is because it's been sensitively conserved to be used for exactly what it was intended for. Whereas, say, the pool design for the Olympics is no longer a public pool. It's become a sort of football training ground and things like that. So Lovell Chen worked on that, and also then through that work, this building was listed on the Heritage Register of Victoria.
So that's a state level significance for its cultural
so it's protected.
heritage. That's correct.
Wonderful.
Well,
Christine, Hannah, it's been lovely talking to you.
It's been great.
I've really enjoyed ourselves. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
You watch the Sacred Spaces. We'll see you next time.